You want to? The modeling is still up on the laptop. Is there a way to see the slides, or just through there? Okay. All right. I think we'll get going. I'll let Sarah introduce yourself.
So my name is Severson with she, her pronouns. Too nice to be back at Access and presenting. So say hello to everybody. I'm at the University of Alberta and I'm a digitization librarian.
I'm Kenton Good. I'm also a librarian at the University of Alberta. My title is Head of Digital Production and Preservation Services. And much like John with his bleeding nose, I managed to injure myself at lunch, losing a crown. So I advise the organizing committee to maybe wrap the remaining presenters in bubble wrap for the evening. So today we're going to talk about managing digital collections in the Internet Archive. We've loaded our slides with tons of links and tons of speaker notes, so we encourage you to either follow along through that link or take a look at them after the fact. So a bit of a history on digitization at University of Alberta Library. We've been doing large-scale digitization for now well over 20 years. Our primary portal is the Peel's Prairie Provinces, which is a site that actually just celebrated its 20th anniversary, I guess, back in June. So it's amazing to have a website that has lasted that long. We also have partnered with various digitization vendors through the years, and specifically with the Internet Archive, started in 2007. And the Internet Archive actually is a fairly large digitization scanning center at the University of Alberta in one of our facilities as well. But today's talk is not about digitization and digitization of the Internet Archive. Today's talk is about why you might consider adding your digital collections, your digitized collections to the Internet Archive. And if you did that, what exactly would that look like to manage that material in that platform? So why would you want to do this? First reason is you would just obviously be contributing to a large nonprofit collaborative initiative, which is the Internet Archive. John mentioned this morning that search is getting kind of weird, and it is sort of the SEO stuff that we learned 10 years ago isn't necessarily working anymore. So adding your collections to a larger initiative with a bit more gravitational pull where people might actually find this stuff, I think is going to be increasingly an important thing. The platform itself is free, which is a dangerous word, free. So you don't actually pay for the storage costs, the processing costs, the transfer costs, things like that. Obviously, the labor to prepare the metadata and to prepare the items for upload is not free and is actually a fairly considerable amount of work. The platform itself has unlimited storage, so you don't need to be shy about uploading really high resolution images to it. You're not actually getting the bill for that. And it really opens up a whole bunch of interesting opportunities that we might not have with some of our more traditional platforms. So I could probably talk for an hour on those opportunities. So just to highlight a couple, one is the great improvements to OCR software that now powers a lot of the new ingest, particularly around my multi-language OCR. So the scan on this page is a Ukrainian journal series that we're scanning right now, and the OCR for that is actually really, really impressive. That opens up a whole bunch of opportunities for digital humanities applications to make use of that OCR. Internet Archive has had an experimental IIIF API for about 7 years, and they just announced last week that is now being formalized, or last month rather, that's being formalized as a core service with the platform, which is really, really cool. And the last use case I just want to reference is we're finding it actually useful as well for what we call rescue projects. So those abandoned digital humanities digitization projects that we often get, faculty knocking the door. What do I do with this? We have one example we're going to show a slide of in a second, where we've managed to rescue the project by sticking that content in Internet Archive. So why specifically in the UAlberta context? The first reason for us is our current platform that powers that Peel's Prairie Province's website is very, very end of life, and it needs to desperately be replaced. So not only is the technology old, but because it hasn't had a lot of eyeballs on it for many years, it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles that we'd want in a digitization platform. We also unfortunately had to pause our efforts on developing our own in-house custom DAMs or digital asset management system due to funding and staffing changes, which was an unfortunate development for us, and we really had to think hard, to answer the morning's question. What are we going to keep? What are we going to let go? Like, it was a real moment of reflection on that topic. So our solution for now was to look for non-exclusive arrangements for access to our digital collections. So by that, we mean we will stick this, or we'll stick our stuff where it makes sense in terms of our digital collections, right? So a logical place for us to start was the Internet Archive. We already had about half of our digital collections in Internet Archive, half outside of Internet Archive. And it seemed like a logical first step to migrate what was outside of that platform into the Internet Archive. So our current work right now is migrating a very large historical newspaper digitization project into Internet Archive. We've been working on this for about a year, not full-time work for a year, but about a year we've been working on this project, migrating, I forget what number, 67,000 or something like that, newspaper issues into Internet Archive. So this is kind of what you get before and after. I don't know what to say about that, and it's just a different view of the particular newspapers. So quick disclaimer, Sarah and I are not experts on the Internet Archive platform, but we've learned a lot of knowledge just by really immersing ourselves in it the past year. Certainly we made a lot of mistakes, but, and trial and error was definitely part of our learning curve. And
it's the mystery.
Was that?
The mystery.
Yeah, the mystery. There's lots of mysterious aspects to the Internet Archive platform that we seem to discover every month, and that's part of the fun, I guess, is the mystery of it. So what skills, what technology do you need to actually start to think about adding stuff to the Internet Archive? The first thing you need is an account within Internet Archive. Anyone in the world with an email can create that account for free. You need a web browser and a spreadsheet, which I assume everyone already has. You're going to need to install the Internet Archive command line tool. Knowledge of command line and bash scripting is certainly going to help you. And if you really want to get deep into this, some form of Python expertise will help as well, but that's certainly not required to work with it. Just a quick word about the command line. It's used for uploading and downloading content, for editing metadata, for pulling up lists of identifiers of what you have in the collection. It's fairly well documented, and I would say the learning curve is manageable. We even train our student employees on it, and they're usually up to speed within a few weeks. So it's not certainly insurmountable. It's super easy to install in Linux and Mac OS. Not really easy to figure out how to deal with it on Windows, because there isn't actually a Windows binary for the Internet Archive command line. But one thing that has worked for us is making use of the Linux subsystem within Windows. Firing that up, installing it, it's a breeze, and it just works. That's kind of a workaround for Windows. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm being a pain, and I'm going to stay seated here.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about uploading your content, and then I'll go into managing the content. So we talked about how it is free. The screenshot here is what it looks like to be able to have it tied to your account. And so this is just one of our accounts, so you can kind of see the public view. One of the things that I want to emphasize here is a lot of the Internet Archive is quite public, right? So we're going to be looking at history pages, and that's, I think, a real advantage of the platform. It really does support a wide variety of file types. I say here no mediation. It just means that while they do have this note in their terms of service that they reserve the right to remove any submitted material, they actually have very little kind of engagement with your material. So there's no review of it or anything like that. There's no documented size restrictions. They really claim that you can put anything in there. I'm going to tell you right now that the really big files are just going to be too slow. It's going to be too painful to upload them. So, for example, we do a lot of map digitization at sometimes 600 DPI, and that just totally falls apart. So we do have to actually resize our images. A really huge thing is it does do the post-processing of creating derivative files here. So you're only uploading your high resolution TIFFs. It's going to take care of your PDF, your OCR, all of that. And that is huge. That's a really big time saver that it will automatically do for you. And so here I just wanted to look at the different media types and show some examples. Most of our examples are text. That's most of what we do. But they do images quite nicely, and you can do images in this kind of slideshow format. I also wanted to showcase that they do streaming video and streaming audio on the next slide here. So this is streaming video and streaming audio are the two examples in the middle here. And this is something we've just kind of played around a little bit with. I actually put up the video example here because it was uploaded by Dale Story, who's in the room when he worked at U of A, I think 2014. So just to showcase how long, yeah. So we've been doing this for a while, but this kind of increase of it has been a while. The audio as well is a podcast that we just recently kind of brought in as a preservation project. This was a little pilot that we're just kind of playing around with. So this is an example there. So Kenton mentioned the Rescue Digital Project. I just wanted to throw this in here so you could see what that looks like. So this is a faculty project digitized a really long time ago. And right now we're rescuing the digital objects and the metadata, and we're putting them into the Internet Archive. And so you can see what that looks like through those. So really this is about the objects of the metadata, and then she can link to them in her own personal website later. But this is a really great example. This was really metadata modeling in the end. That's what this project was. And so it's in progress still. So not everything is up there, but it's a good example of that. So uploading, I wanted to look at uploading items manually. So there's basically three major ways that you can upload. And I put here manually, this is drag and drop interface. It's really simple, very easy, straightforward. It's a little slow and a little prone to mistakes. So of course we have to be a bit careful with this. We use this though in terms of doing ready reference for digitization. So we have a maps librarian that does a little bit of digitization occasionally to be able to answer reference questions. So now he has the ability to be able to just go into a web interface, quickly upload the items rather than sending them in a Google Drive file or something like that. We have all of his metadata ready for him in a kind of transformed state in a CVS, so he can just cut and paste. So that's just an example of why and when we do it. And we really actually find that's helpful to be able to have many people who can upload objects to the Internet Archive. The next thing, which we probably do the most, is the digitization via a spreadsheet. And this was a real game changer for us. So this is what we use for the medium-sized collections, so 200 or 300, maybe small ones. And really, it's just putting files on your like on your desktop and throwing in a spreadsheet. And so there's lots of examples out there, and this is what we're doing by the command line. And so I have a student who does this occasionally. We've done little bespoke projects in the library before. If we ever want to kind of move objects over. But again, we're not reliant on programmer time, right? And so being able to have multiple different people that can do this is really great. And then the last one, which is what we've been developing for this large scale migration. This is a little bit harder to share, but if you guys do contact us, we can kind of maybe walk you through some of the scripts. But these have all been developed with the Python library because they're pulling in from our preservation infrastructure, and they're doing transformative work on our mods or METs, like legacy mods and METs records, right? So we're really utilizing all of that and kind of pulling it in. And so that's what this newspapers project is. The rest of the Peel Prairie project, we're kind of moving through all of that. And so we just really wanted to mention this so that people knew that it's possible, but it's not the only way that you can get material into the Internet Archive. So the next slide that I have here is this history. And so I was talking a little bit about how this kind of transparency. And so if any objects in the Internet Archive, you can just take details out and you can put history and you can actually see what's happened to it. So this is an example of one of ours. I can see when it was uploaded. I can see who changed metadata. I can see if it's been changed or anything like that. So again, we have lots of people uploading, but we do have this mechanism to be able to like kind of see what's happening. And I think that's really interesting to be able to get a sense of it. I also just want to point out that you can do this on other people's collections as well. So right now I'm logged in, and most of this material, most of this stuff is when you're logged into your own collections. But if you do take out the URL and just pop it into history, I can look at other people's collections as well in the history of that. So I actually did that to Vic's collection earlier, just kind of test this theory. And so I can see when they uploaded it and when they changed the metadata and which account did that. So to know that what you're doing is very public. So I'm going to talk about some of the common errors just so you know that what might happen and how we can fix them. The two biggest errors that we notice with large scale uploads is that it's missing thumbnails or there may be no viewable or derived files. And so this is where the mystery of the Internet Archive comes in. Because it's really difficult to understand where the errors are coming from, why there's very little error reporting. They're always very helpful when we get in contact with them. It's a question of getting in contact with them and if you can actually get somebody to help. So what we've done mostly is to fix this is just run scripts that go over again and again. So, or doing a manual process. So here's for missing thumbnails. We can do a manual process where you just grab an image and you just re-upload it. So that's a really simple solution. We've also created some really basic bash scripts to kind of just go through and automate that process and re-upload. We do a lot of things of try again, and that's usually how we kind of fix it. Derive issues, again, we did find an example here. You're looking at the history. You can do this programmatically as well. You can kind of call on a script to be able to see which items are not in a derived state. Again, why this happens, we don't necessarily know, but you can rerun it both manually and through a script. And one of the things that we have noticed is that the derive process often fails with poor quality text. Like, I don't know, newspapers that were microfilmed in the 1970s. Hey, we've got a lot of. So we have found ways to get around that. You can use metadata here. Metadata is very powerful in the Internet Archive. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. But you can use metadata to say basically adaptive OCR. And so what you're telling the Internet Archive is don't stop when you hit an error, just keep going. And so then it will actually run through the OCR. Okay. I'm just going to kind of skip through a few of these. These are examples of how to fix the derive issue. Yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit out. Okay, so let's talk about managing your collection. So this is kind of after you've uploaded your items, what can you actually do with them? And there's quite a few different things I wanted to talk about, which is things like creating collections, adding files, fixing mistakes, managing your metadata, and that. So let's go into creating collections here. So creating collections, you can create as many as you want. In fact, that they'll encourage you to create as many collections as you want. They are nested, but it's not hierarchical. And this is actually a really frustrating pain point with us right now because we're trying to figure out how to actually model that because this idea of having 150 collections actually doesn't really fit when you can't nest them hierarchical. The nesting is just kind of an inheritance of permissions and things like that. And so it doesn't really do much. But it's really easy. You just email info@archive.org and you say, please, can I have a collection? And they say, no problems. They give it to you. So that works really nicely. If you don't include a collection, just a note that it will default into their open source collection. And I just wanted to make this note because only the uploader can actually make that change. So even if you have permissions or you think you have permissions on that, if you have an account, like somebody else is doing the uploads, they have to move that. So that's been a real pain point for me before. Next is the benefits of the collection. So, you get a dedicated URL, which is great. You get lots of space. You get a little bit of space for collection descriptions, kind of collection metadata. It's much easier to scope a search, which is the big thing that people tend to really like, and I think is most useful with our users when I talk to them. A little bit of collection level statistics, and permissions operate on the collection level. So I talked about users. And so this notion of the permissions are all or nothing. And so that's one of the reasons that it's nice to be able to see who is doing the uploading in terms of the accounts. There's no, yeah, they get access to all of your permissions. And it's based on an account. And you, again, just email Internet Archive and you say, I want these 3 accounts to have permissions on our library account, and then that waterfalls to everything that goes underneath. So it's pretty easy. You have to remember to email them again and say, please take off this person. So we use shared accounts for better or for worse to kind of avoid this, but that's kind of one of the realities. I just wanted to include this because this happens a lot. So people always ask, but why is the URL for the Canadian Libraries collection, which is what we're all nested underneath, why is it Toronto? And so this is they can't change this. And so this is an example of an identifier that cannot be changed. And it's just a great example to think about what your identifiers are before you do them. Okay. So this is where it starts. Don't email them and ask them like I have many times. I'm going to quickly go through a few more of these, adding or changing files. So just this idea that you can add files to existing items and they don't show up in the display. This is great if you have transcriptions of letters, for example. It's a great storage place. Anybody can download them. You can programmatically download them. This is a really big thing, right? So again, you can kind of give that access to digital scholarship projects. Things like legacy alto metadata. We were talking about how rich this is, how amazing it is, but our platforms can't necessarily utilize it. But we could at least put that there so that if somebody wanted to download it, they could use it. To change the display files, this is obnoxious. You have to delete all the files and then re-upload them. There's no drag and drop interface. There's no rotate within. This is frustrating to no end, but it just is the way it is. Oh, so yeah, I wanted to talk about if you make a mistake, so we've said before, you can't delete identifiers. Absolutely not. This is database integrity. Internet Archive won't let you do it. You can hide an item. So this is actually a really popular thing that we do a lot of. So using metadata and you say never index true. The thing here is that it's still accessible if somebody knows the URL. And so it means that if it's been up for a while and somebody has favorited it, if it's used in a citation somewhere else, somebody will still have access to it if they click through, but it won't show up in your browse anymore, right? So it kind of controls that. We actually use this a lot because we digitize large folders of items that then we split into individual items. And so I want to hide the folder while I maintain the individual items so to not confuse the browsing experience. But like in our archives and their finding aid, they want to be able to show the original order in their folders. And so in their finding aid, they'll have both the folders and the item URLs, right? So we kind of get the best of both worlds. So we use this actually quite a bit. There is the option to dark an item, which is kind of much more of a full delete. The thing here is you can't reuse the identifier. So if you're using unique identifiers that are part of your, system, you can't reuse them. So even if you've darked an item. And then, yeah, you can delete all the contents using the command line. This is the files, and then you can kind of re-upload items. So just to know that you can do that. Metadata in the Internet Archive, I wanted to talk about a little bit here. So the big thing to understand is that there's both administrative and descriptive metadata. They do keep them in separate files. You have very little control over what they do with the metadata, but you can also do whatever you want because the schema is really open. So custom fields, you can make as many as you want. We're actually working right now to define our own metadata model. Our metadata team is doing a lot of really great work to look at all of the custom fields that we've used to be able to really kind of understand what that model looks like in our context, which I think is going to really make a big difference in terms of how we're utilizing it. Lots of frustration here about things like where it shows up. I just really wanted to highlight this idea of they have a license URL, which is where you put public domain information, and it's right at the top, hyper visible. It's amazing. If you want to put rights information, it gets totally hidden underneath the fold, and you have no control over that. So that's really frustrating for us. Modifying metadata in bulk. Again, this is incredibly easy. This might be a terrible thing that it is so easy. You can just run a spreadsheet and quickly change things. I've absolutely introduced typos and new custom fields because I've spelt things wrong before in terms of metadata. Again, we can quickly change it and we can quickly update it, but there is that nice ease for it. We use this a lot in terms of enhancing metadata, right? So we're digitizing sometimes with really basic information, but we can enhance it, especially in the early pandemic where we just really threw up a bunch of stuff to make sure it was accessible. And then people at home who are working from home could do more enhanced digitization in that kind of capacity. So that's been a really game changer that we can actually respond to those enhancements really quickly. Again, I have student employees who are doing this, and then I can follow up on their work after. Our metadata team can do this. Our archives team can do this. And so again, it's really nicely distributed in that sense. I wanted to talk a little bit about the user interface. And this is mostly because I don't think I understood how well it supports Boolean. You can actually do quite complex searches. The other thing is it's not quite a stable URL, but it's not a session URL as well. So you can build very complex searches and then you can share them in the reference chat, right? So somebody can actually follow exactly to that same search. You can link to them in pages and things. So that's actually quite nice. And we found that really useful when we're trying to talk to people about different things. Collection search does, again, this is another example that I just wanted to throw in here, again, of a really complex query. What this is actually a query of all of our public domain postcards. And so you can see the dirty URL that produces. Still, it's a very useful query to be able to say, here's our like 11,000 public domain postcards that you can go download. Gallery mode, I just threw this in really last minute because I wanted to talk about an upcoming project that we have where we are digitizing a number of materials that are going to be in a special collections exhibition. And so this idea of somebody can scan a QR code and then maybe able to flip through the book on your phone because it is really mobile friendly. And so again, you can kind of utilize the Internet Archive in a way that makes sense for you. You can skip all the interface. You can link directly to the item. You can embed it in a way and actually maybe not use any of the stuff around it. Filters, I put this in just so that I could point out that there's a really big bug in the filters right now. So here in the subject area, you'll see that we have the gateway, which is one of our biggest subjects. So I was talking about collections and how we're trying to model. So we do a lot of serials, right? So we don't want to create a collection for every single title, but how do we isolate it? And so the metadata team has chosen to do titles in our subjects, right? So that's what this is, the gateway. And so you can click on it and be able to isolate it really quickly and see what it is. Right now, it doesn't support special characters. And so this happened about 2 months ago. It was an interface change that we discovered. It wasn't advertised. They did a couple different updates to the interface. Some were great, but this was one of the problems. I've reported it 3 times, nothing's happened. So the question here is, are we going to change our metadata? We really don't want to. Or are we going to deal with it? So you do have to be kind of on, like I check the Internet Archive probably every couple of days and try and figure, see these things because we don't get communication from them necessarily about these changes. So querying collections, this is probably one of the most powerful things that we do a lot of. And so this is via advanced search. And as you scroll down, you can actually produce CSV files of everything that's in your collection. So when I was talking about modifying metadata in bulk, this is how I'm creating the spreadsheets to be able to then do the modifications, right? So if I want to change something, if I want to add metadata and I want like a list of everything in the collections, I'm just going over here and I'm dumping it all into a CV. So the real limit here is that you can't query every single field. Most notably, the notes field is missing within their kind of fields to return. We use this all the time to be able to just understand our collections, to manipulate them, to update them and things. There is a special tool called Revenge of the Metadata Manager that they use internally that they have given us access to because we've asked. I did just want to mention it in case you do become kind of more of a power user. You can ask them to give you collections. They just don't want to give it out to anybody, which is fair. And it's basically this, but a little bit more powerful where you can query every single thing. We mentioned that we do digitization, right? And so this is how I kind of keep up to date with what we're doing for digitization as well as by querying our collections. Things that you can do if you query your collections, you can find out who favorited your items. And so that's just kind of interesting analytics to be able to get a sense. I've definitely gone in and looked at these different favorite collections just to get a sense of what people are looking at, to get a sense. It's kind of the next level of statistics. The next thing I want to talk about is transcluding items. And so this is, again, actually quite powerful and something that we do a lot of. So it just means that we can split up a digitized item programmatically after it's been uploaded. So the big thing here is it actually maintains the relationship within the administrative metadata of transcludes and transcluded by. And so you can kind of maintain this metadata relationship. And then usually what we're doing is we're hiding the kind of parent item of the bigger piece. So we use this to save money on scanning. Sometimes it's a lot easier to scan one big folder rather than a bunch of little items. Also, you can scan large groups of items with minimal metadata and then you can enhance it later. We're doing a bunch of concert programs right now from our Faculty of Music in this way. And it also means that we can get lots of people doing the metadata. And so like a lot of our reference assistants or ISSs are helping us with this project. And so it means more people know about our digital projects, more people are involved, which is really fantastic. Okay, last couple minutes for me. I'm going to talk about access options. And there's three main access options that the Internet Archive gives you. And so the big one is controlled digital lending, which I think we've all heard about. And we do use a lot in our WEDRIC collection, which is historical textbooks. And so those are in copyright items that are in our offsite storage that are not available, so people can use them. So users can borrow them for mostly 1 hour. Some of them are 14 days. That's pretty limited though. And the user only needs an Internet Archive account to be able to borrow them. And then anything we put in CDL is automatically included in these collections, most notably the books for people with print disabilities, which is another really great feature. This has nothing to do with if you have your own digital collections. I just wanted to feature this and talk about it really briefly, that they do have a print disabilities collection that is massive. It's about $1.9 million or 1.9 million copies, not dollars. And the university, so you can be a qualifying authority and you can work with your Office of Accessibility. And if they want access to it, you can kind of grant that access. And what that means is access to non-DRM files that can be used. And so and getting qualifying authority with the Internet Archive, it's a Google form that you need to fill out, and then you can work on that. And we're happy to share the work for how we do that. And it's been a really great resource for our Office of Accessibility. So my last slide, and this is one that I talk about. Sorry. Collaborative collections. I just really wanted to give a shout out to this concept. And so I think we're all familiar with maybe the government collection, Canadian Government Publications Collection. So this is a collection of University of Alberta, University of Toronto. The big thing here is that one item can live in multiple collections, right? So this idea of it's still in the University of Alberta's collection, but then you can also add it to these more collaborative collections. The thing here is that it's a really low barrier way to create these more collaborative collections. And so if you're working with a smaller institution that may not have the resources, but they have digitized maybe 25 items, they could put them in the Internet Archive. Like this is a viable solution that they could do. And then you could create a collection that's more holistic. So I'm really curious about how this might play into community archives, right? Community digitization projects because having control and sovereignty over their own data, even if it is in the Internet Archive, it's still in their control underneath their permissions. Like that could be really interesting as models. And so the other models here are the Medical Heritage Library, the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And again, even if you just want to add your stuff to the Medical Heritage Library, you literally email them. And then what you do is you add one piece of metadata to everything you want to add in. Boom, done. So it's really nice and simple that way. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it over to Kenton. He'll talk about downloading.
All right. So after you've spent all that time uploading and getting your metadata all figured out and everything else, you're probably then going to want to consider, how do I get that out again? So what's that strategy for down my content? So the why is simple. You likely want to copy outside of the Internet Archive platform for various reasons. One thing you might want to do is back up just the derivative files that were created from the upload, right? So if you already have preserved your master, your preservation images elsewhere, you might just want to grab a copy of the OCR to then append your preservation pack to make a more complete package. Or you might want to download just the PDFs of everything you've digitized to add to a discovery system of such, if that discovery system allows for such a thing. So there's a number of ways to approach downloading any record within the Internet Archive. Also, thank you, has very prominent download options always on every record. They're always on the right-hand side, where you can download at an individual file level, or you can download a complete bundle of every file that's associated with that record. So that's very front and center. What you see on the other side of this slide is the variety of files that you are able to download from every record. That doesn't really make sense to do at scale. If you're downloading more than about 10 objects, that's not how you're going to want to do it. So a better approach to download at scale is definitely through the command line interface. Very simple syntax. It's truly IA download, the identifier, and it brings all that content down to your home directory. It's truly that simple. And you can see the screen cap of the files I downloaded is identical to what was on the web download. Fun with downloading. I don't know. I spent 2 months downloading this year, so I've had to embrace the fun aspects of downloading. A number of different ways you can approach downloading. One would be to download at a collection level. So if you've broken your material up into sub collections, you might just say, I'm going to bring down everything in that collection to break it up a little bit. More likely than not, though, the approach you're going to want to take is coming up with a list of identifiers in a text file, and then just asking the command line to bring down all the files that are in that text file. And you'd use that search tool we showed to do that. One neat thing about command line download is it allows you to download more than just your own stuff. So you can use it to download absolutely any object on the Internet Archive. And if you've explored the AV sections of the Internet Archive, you know there's lots of cool stuff there. So just as an example, here's a query I crafted that would download every MPEG 3 in the Grateful Dead collection, if you're so inclined. Probably best not to do it in this room, or we'll bring down the Wi-Fi. So a few lessons we learned. I did mention we spent quite a bit of time downloading this year. We decided to do just a complete full backup of everything we've ever done on the Internet Archive, which was a massive project, close to 38 terabytes, about 5.7 million files. One lesson is there's many ways to approach this. So there isn't necessarily a right way or a wrong way. I know there's even other tools out there you could use to accomplish this. I've been playing around with the rclone application lately for downloading from Google Drive, and I noticed one of the targets in that is Internet Archive. I haven't played with it yet. For us, it made a lot of sense to organize our downloads into smaller batches. The reason for that is if you do get an error after spending 3 or 4 days downloading thousands of objects, it's much easier to recover if you're just dealing with a smaller batch of objects. So breaking your downloads into batches of say 1,000 is probably good practice. The speed of downloading is really variable, and it was very difficult to get benchmarking for how long any of this was going to take. There was moments where I thought we'd be here till Christmas, and then there was, you go away for the weekend and you come back and it's like, oh man, I can't believe how much we downloaded over the weekend. And that's very much dependent on what else is happening on the platform at any given time. At the command line, you can choose to authenticate yourself with your Internet Archive ID. You can just remain anonymous, I guess. For the most part, nothing really changes with downloading, with the one exception that if you've added your material to the CDL collection or the print disability collection, then it will allow you to download the full package of that material. Obviously, they can't allow people to to download from the CDL collection if it's not their own stuff. And I'm starting to think about how we then approach this sort of more incrementally. Probably one approach we'll do is just to use that advanced search tool to come up with a list of identifiers every month that we just bring down everything we did. But I'm struggling a bit with how will we capture any of those metadata tweaks or anything else that happened in the interface during that time period. And I really try and avoid another full download if we can avoid it. So what's the downside of this? So far, we've given a pretty rosy picture. That this is just a few thoughts. Thank you. A few thoughts we had. One is limited change management. And as we said at the beginning, this is free. You don't sign a service level agreement to use this software. And so, your expectations need to be kept in check a little bit. But ultimately, you have very little control. Changes to the interface will happen. Metadata might be added to your objects. That's just a reality of doing this. Limited communication on outages and platform slowness. That's a bit of a frustration. The sort of splintered social media world we now live in doesn't help with that either. Limited granularity of user permissions. It's an all or nothing thing. So Sarah and I have the same level of permissions as the accounts that our students have, which takes a bit of getting used to. And ultimately, it's a shared infrastructure, so you can and will be impacted by what others are doing on the system. So if someone is trying to harvest the complete Internet Archive one day, that very well might impact your metadata updates, right? So there's days where your metadata updates just fly, and there's days where it's like, oh man, that took 15 minutes to update that record. It's not just Sarah and I working on this. We do have a large team of colleagues who work on this. Our metadata team, our digitization, digital production team, our preservation team, both current and former employees. And we just wanted to highlight a couple OA books that are relevant: Data Mining, the Internet Archive Collection, and Introduction to Bash Command.
These are actually programming historian lessons, if you've ever done it. And I highlighted these because these are actually ones that I use to be able to learn a little bit, and I found them incredibly helpful.
And I think that is all we had. I don't know if we have a few minutes for questions. We also included Lauren's email here. She works for Internet Archive Canada and said she'd be available to also answer any questions if you want to connect with her.
Hi, I have a question. So I'm the copyright officer at our university, and just wondering how you manage copyright with the Internet Archive. I was reading a little bit about it, about their policy, but just wondering if you've encountered any challenges or if what you do to ensure that material that you're uploading or downloading is copyright compliant.
Yeah, so that's actually, we do quite a bit of work on that in terms of digitization selection. So kind of before that, we're establishing what kind of rights. And we're actually just now working more and more into actually adding rights at the item level. This is why I'm really frustrated that the metadata is really hidden, because it's actually not showing. And so there's a handful of collections where you're starting to see that. But yeah, it's a little bit more on kind of a proposal selections. And so we do things like we do risk assessment sometimes. Some of the material is public domain. A lot of the stuff that we do is actually with permission. So it's in copyright, but with permission. And so we've been trying to add more of those statements. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about the specific questions, but we've never had any challenges or any things like that. People are mostly leaving comments about our metadata. That's their number one thing that they like to say. You can't delete comments unless you email the Internet Archive, which is really obnoxious too.
Hi, you guys mentioned mods and mets. I'm wondering if you switched from Islandora to Internet Archive, or is that just some other platform that uses that?
That was the Peel Prairie Provinces that was using mods and mats, which was not Islandora.
No.
You mentioned the unique IDs, the URLs, sorry, are still accessible to the public if they know the URL to go to, even if it's not being indexed. You also mentioned that there is some sort of change log that people can see who has made changes when. Is there a history of what the old versions were before it was changed? If I needed to, say, scrub data because it was accidentally put in there and grossly inappropriate, is there a way to properly remove that?
It depends a little bit about what it is. So if it's a file that you need to, you can, the default is always going to be that it creates a backup. If I delete the files and then re-upload them, it actually defaults to creating backups. And so you can turn that function off. If it's metadata though, you actually would probably have to darken item. Because it's not obvious and it's not easy to access, but it is there in that change log where if you go down and look at one of the details, it will show that you added metadata. And so that metadata history will be there. Yeah. So you'd have to darken item then.
Oh, over there.
Hi, Ken and Sarah. Thank you again for this wonderful presentation. Just, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the collaborative collections component. I think you had mentioned, Sarah. With Canadiana, we're looking at ways to do something like that, I think, whether that's by moving content in or interlinking out through linked open data or whatnot. I'm just kind of curious about what the work is here.
Yeah, this is something that we haven't actually done much work ourselves other than just that. So there's this Canadian government publications collection. I think it's actually an initiative of the Internet Archive Canada. And so our collections are in there, but it's not something that we're actively kind of fostering or anything. My point here is that it's really easy to add the collection. So this is a metadata thing that I didn't talk about a lot, but when you need to move an item to a collection, when you want to add it to a new collection, it really is just a metadata field that you're quickly putting in. And so that kind of accessibility of adding it and moving it around. If you want to have a collaborative collection, you just have to give people permission. And so again, if you're the person that creates it and then you say, okay, I want to give Queen's University underneath this account, they have permission to add items now. Like, so it's just very easy in that way. And I think that is such a barrier often when we're thinking about these collaborative collections. You know, am I sending hard drives across the country or things like that? And so that's what I really like about it. The Medical Heritage Library, I think, is a great example if you want to see how that's like a really large scale subject-based collection with many, many institutions. And they've built a front-end search. I'm not entirely sure why, but they've kind of built this other experience on top of it. But the actual Internet Archive collection just really operates very nicely.
I am really impressed with what you guys have done. This is a really elegant solution to quite a significant problem that you are facing. So I wonder, now that you have had so many successes with this model, do you think that you'll go back to building an on-site dams? And if so, you think so? Okay. So what are the major drivers then for that? Like, what are the things that you can't do that you really need to be able to do where you need to have your own dams?
Do you want to take that? There's so many.
Sure. Maybe we'll both answer this one. Yeah, it's a bit of a hot topic. I think I think there is still a desire for a DAMS of some sort, and I think it's partly just where do we stick the metadata, right? Like, where's the definitive edition of the metadata? And I think that's one of the challenges we have. We have a very brilliant metadata team who create very rich metadata that's not necessarily fully reflected within the Internet Archive interface. So I think that's particularly one use case where we would still desire some form of a DAMS solution. I'm not sure if Sarah had anything else.
Yeah, the interface changes are absolutely mind-bogglingly annoying. And so just that idea of having no control over that whatsoever is absolutely, I think, a use case just for the dev. So like that control, like we do really need that. So I don't think we'll ever give that up. What I would really hope for though in the future that these two things are linked, right? So the Internet Archive really supplies like I don't think we ever have to develop an API for a DAM because the Internet Archive has got that covered. Like the programmatic access to it. Like there's so many other advantages too. So understanding our digital collections in both ways and have them really like tied closely. And I think that's the long-term goal, is just to use this until we can move everything into our own systems and then be able to just have them out there. Another thing we didn't really talk about too is just like the the serendipity of discovery in the Internet Archive. I know the search is not great at all times, but I talk to users, I've done user tests, and I watch people, at the bottom, you'll see suggested items based on metadata. They use that all the time and they find things in other people's collections. We find things in other people's collections that we didn't know. So I think the power of that, like, I don't think we could ever give up that.
Thanks.
Those are great questions. Thank you.